Hello world and welcome to Marnie Makes Games. The other day I was on Reddit and somebody asked if there's an easy way to quickly have your character swap skins or change into another character without losing its motion or animation. Well, at first I thought to myself, Unity Sprite Swap. And that's what I tried, but I actually found a different way as well, which is much easier. Want to know more? Then come with me. My name is Marnie and I make games. Now, the secret to getting this done is in the rigging of your sprite. So let's look at how my sprite was set up. Right here I've got the GIMP. You could also have used something like Krita, which is good, or the Adobe products that are out there. Anything that you can do multiple layers and layer groups. In this case I used GIMP and I set up my character with each element of the character on a different layer. I also named my layers to make sense so that it's easy to find stuff later on. Now, I took all the layers of this skin and put them under one layer group. And this is very important, as you'll see later on. So I've got two layer groups here. One is for my knight character, which is this one. And its parts are separated out into different layers. And one is for my Magneto character. I'm sure there's no relation to any movie character that I've ever seen. Just saying. Okay, let's get to the Unity editor. So, what happens when we import? Let's just grab this over here. I export it to a PSD file from GIMP. If I import, I drag my PSD file over here. Now, you'll notice up here on the initial import, it's imported via the Unity Editor texture importer, which is the default if you're importing sprites. But we want to use the Unity PSD importer. That comes as part of the Unity animation package. We also, actually no, the Unity PSD importer is a separate package. But the animation rigging and stuff, which we'll be using in a little while, comes as part of the Unity 2D animation package. So be sure to get those from the package manager if you don't have them. Okay, so we've switched over to the PSD importer and you'll see that the inspector properties for this has changed. It's now also a prefab instead of just a plain sprite. You can leave everything as per the defaults, but when you get to layer import, you want to go down there and click use layer groups and then just apply. So let me show you what happens when we go to the sprite editor. If you go to the skinning editor over here, and we go to visibility, you'll now see that the sprites for this are arranged in two different groups, just like your layer groups were. This is going to be important for our switching method. This video needs to be kept short, and I've already done videos about rigging, so if you're unfamiliar with it, go look it up and maybe go check out my spider video in 2D, which I talked about rigging characters. Let's get out of here. Okay. I want to show you an advantage of using layer groups. I'm just going to disable this character because I'll be using sprite swap on that one. But on this character, as you can see, the sprites for it are also in two groups, just like the imported sprite in the sprite editor. So now if we want to change the skin, we can disable one set and enable the other one. But of course you'd think, okay, I've disabled these, but what about the animations that were associated with them? Well, when we rigged it up, we actually set the animations to each corresponding piece. So let me show you my prepped character. Let me just get down here. There's my sprite swap character. So if we look at our bones, actually let's look at the sprites first. Here's my head, and if we go to bone influence for that sprite, you'll see it's affected by bone 3, which is this head bone. Now if I go to my knight, the head, that's slightly different shape but still aligned to the other character's head, is also only influenced by bone number 3, and the same holds true for all the other body parts. Now if we look at the character prefab as it was imported, you'll see that you have this set of sprites, and each one of these has a sprite skin component and a sprite renderer. So the sprite skin basically refers to a bone that's bound to it, and it moves the sprite and deforms it according to the bones that it's bound to. The sprite renderer, which will become important when we do the sprite swap component, basically has a reference to a sprite which tells us which sprite is displayed for that element. But the bones for our character are a completely different game object below here. So that means that whether or not we disable this or this makes absolutely no difference to the animation, because our animation actually animates these bones. Let's see if we go into the scene, and I'll show you what I mean. Oops, can't see my bones. That's not going to work. But it should give us an idea of how our swap's going to work. So we have one character, only one character enabled. Then we disable the first and enable the second, and that's all. As you can see, the animation keeps going without any change, but obviously we want to do this at the click of a button and much faster. So let's do a little script for that. My script is over here, which I've already prepared. I've called this the switcher script. You'll see it takes two game objects, the Magneto game object and the Knight game object, which are these parents to all the sprite elements of the body. So I guess you know where we're going right now. Let's go to the script. Now in the script on switcher, you'll see that I've got those serialized fields for the game objects, and then I just have character index, which is an int, and I've already initialized that to 0. Under update, all we do is we check whether or not the G key was pressed. This is under the old input system, but doing it on the new input system is basically the same. All you need to do is to react to the event that happens from the input system. If you want me to do a video about the new input system at some point, just give me a shout in the comments and I'll get right on it. Then right here, we take our characters array, we grab the index we want. I'll talk about this in a moment. And we take the game object for that, which I can actually remove here because this is already a game object. and just make set active to false. That means we deactivate that game object. Then we advance our character index by 1, which means we are grabbing the next character in our array and we just enable its game object. Now, why do I have this piece of code over here? Well, I could write something like if character index is larger than characters.length -1, then make character index 0, but this is actually easier. We just use the modular operator, which is basically dividing something by a number and giving us back what's left. So let's work out a little scenario here. We started with character index 0 and we've done 6 changes already. Now we press the button again, we come in here and change number 7 is about to happen. So what's happening here? We get character index equals 6 divided by characters.length, which is 2 right now. So that means it divides in without anything being left. So our index here is 0. That means that the game object in position 0 here will get disabled. Now we increment this. So now character index is 7. And we say characters at index 7 divided by 2 modulo. So 7 divided by 2 is 3, which gives us 6. We have 1 left that we can't divide 2 into, so our index here is 1. And of course then we just say game object at index 1 and set it to true. Pretty easy and straightforward, and you've seen how it works. So well, that's pretty cool, but you said we were going to do sprite swap. Yes, I did. So let's look at how we would do this at sprite swap. Now, if you were paying attention, you would have seen that my sprite swap character actually changes bit by bit and not all at once. This is not a flaw, it's a feature. And I'm not just saying that. I actually made the change so that you can see we can do this all in one go, or we can make it a process. Like, let's say you have think of a cartoon scene in your game where a character drinks a potion that makes him a giant, and instead of just having a cloud and going poof and you have a giant, he starts running away from somebody and his arm gets really huge while his legs are still the same size, and then his head pops up and becomes bigger, and so on and so forth. So you can have a staggered change if you want to, and you'll see how that works in the code. But first, let's talk about how sprite swap actually works. So sprite swap consists of several components. You would have a sprite library asset, then you'd have a sprite library component, which is over here, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a while. Just remember that gets attached to the parent game object, and then on these parts over here, come on, where we have our sprite skin and our sprite renderer, we attach a sprite resolver component. So what do all these components do? Well, your sprite library basically holds an index of all the sprites, and it has categories and labels. So think of a category as a collection of images that are related. For instance, here I've got the right arm as a category, and I've got the different sprites that we'll use for a right arm as labels. Now if I change the label on this one to knight, all of a sudden our character's arm changes into, well, the knight's arm. And I can change it back as well. Also click there if you want to. And that's basically all the sprite resolver does. Now, how do we set up our asset? Because as you can see here, the sprite library requires a sprite library asset. This basically populates all of this down here. which is a list or a library of the categories and the sprites that belong to each label in that category. So usually you would go right click and you go 2D Sprite Library asset, and it will create a new Sprite Library asset like that. I'll delete this because I've already prepared one for us. If you look at the one I've prepared, I want you to notice something. Here's the categories. You can do a plus here to add a new category. And there are my body parts. The categories are all named after body parts, and the labels are the different labels for the body parts of the characters. Now, you'll see that I've named my category head, and then the labels for head is not Magneto head or Knight head, but simply the character name. Also notice that I've been consistent throughout all my categories. The reason for this will become apparent when we look at the code, because this just makes it easier for us to do the code to switch between characters. Now, with Sprite Library, or the sprite swapping, and with the other method I just showed you of game object deactivation, both of those, you are not limited to just having 2 skins for your characters or 2 characters. You can put on, well, I wouldn't say as many as you like, because you'll probably get performance issues when you start getting into the tens of characters, but still it's very flexible. Okay, let's go away. Let's go have a look at our code, but just before we do, I'd like you to remind you that if you like what I do, why not subscribe and maybe hit that notification bell so you know when I release new videos. Alright, to the code. So this sprite swapper script will also get attached to the root of your character as before. It's got a serialized field with character names. So this is basically our 2 character names here will be Knight and Magneto. You need to take care that you write the character names exactly the way you have them in your sprite library. You'll see why now. Then we have an array of sprite resolvers. Those are the sprite resolvers that are attached to our game object here. Okay, while we're here, notice that this doesn't have a sub-object for Knight. I deleted that because we won't need it. We just need one, and we'll reference these and change the sprites on them directly instead of enabling this whole game object or disabling the other one. Right, then we just have the character index once more as an int. Under update, I look for a key. The key in this case will be S. So if we press S in this frame, we'll start a coroutine. Now, you can use a normal function here if you want to. The coroutine was just so we have that flexibility to do the staggered change of our character. Then in change sprites, which is the coroutine or function if you don't want a delay, we go character index and immediately advance it by 1. Why do we do this? Well, remember we started on character 0. So then if we press S, that already means we want to change characters, and we advance it here, not here. If you advance it here, inside the for each loop, you're going to get a jumble of character parts each time you switch. Because it will go, okay, give me the parts of this character, and then on the next time the for each loop goes through, it'll have advanced the index again and give you a part of another character on the same frame, which we don't want. So then we just simply say for each sprite resolver in sprite resolvers, take the sprite resolver and set category and label. Sprite resolver does not have a function that just lets you set the label. So we have to use this, and we go sprite resolver.category for our category, because we want to stay in the category we're in, which would be head or arm or leg. And then we go to get the name of the label. Now, the name of the label is just going to come from our character names array. And then we use the modulo trick again, so that we can avoid having a out of range error for our array, and basically don't need to do anything tricky with this character index. So for the first run, I'll be on 0 for character index. I press the key, advance it, and now my character index is 1. I come in here, I change to the character, change the label on each one of these sprite resolvers to the character name at position 1 in my array. And of course, when you get to the third iteration of this, you'll again be on 0, which is the first one. Again, you can have as many of these as you want. Then finally, we're just going to yield and wait for 0.2 seconds, so that we don't change the whole character at once, but we actually just stagger the change. Of course, if you want, you can completely just make this 0 if you want to keep the coroutine, or you can just make this a normal function and completely forget about the yield stuff. Right, so let's jump back into the editor and see how that works. In the editor, I press S, and there we go. I've changed it. One last time, let's just change that to 0. Actually, there we just skip one frame. Let's save it. That takes a moment. And now if we press S, it just instantly changes. And you can play around with this, because on the first method you are enabling and disabling game objects. You can actually have these be slightly different. So on Magneto you could add a, let's say, a particle system to his hand, and it won't affect the knight at all. So you could have Magneto spraying little magnetic particles or whatever you want, while the knight could be holding a sword, and it will have absolutely no effect on the animation. That's it for me. Until we see each other again, my name is Mani, and I make games.